Welcome back, everyone. Or if you're new here, welcome. Pull up a chair and make yourself comfortable, because tonight we're going somewhere dark together. My name is not important, but what's important is that this is the channel where we dig into the kinds of stories that don't belong anywhere else. It's not quite ghost stories, not quite true crime, something right in the middle. Something that makes you question what the world is actually made of. Tonight's video is called Encounters That Defy Logic, and it's exactly what it sounds like. We have 6 stories for you tonight. 6 accounts from real people. People who had ordinary lives, ordinary days, right up until they didn't. These stories were gathered from various sources, online forums, and secondhand reports from people who needed someone to tell. Some of the names have been changed. Some details were pieced together from multiple tellings, but the core of each one? That's real, or as real as anything gets when you're talking about the things that don't make sense. We're going to go one story right into the next, so I'd recommend finding a comfortable spot. And if you're listening alone at night, maybe keep the lights on. It's just a suggestion. One quick thing before we begin. If you're new here, consider hitting that subscribe button. We put out content like this every week, and trust me, tonight's lineup is the kind you'll want to come back for. And if you enjoy what we do here, a like on this video goes a long way. It helps people find us who need to hear exactly this kind of thing. Alright, let's get into it. Story 1. The House That Moved. There is a type of amnesia called transient global amnesia, where a person suddenly loses all memory of the past several hours, has no idea where they are, and cannot retain any new information for a period of time. Neurologists say it's benign. They say it's nothing to worry about. Sarah Elroy's doctors told her the same thing. What they couldn't explain was why, when her memory returned. She was standing in a house she had never seen, a house that her neighbors swore had always been there. In a neighborhood she'd lived in for 11 years, Sarah shared her account in a private Facebook group called Glitch Witnesses, a closed community for people who believe they've experienced breaks in what they call consensus reality. A mutual contact forwarded it to me about 8 months ago. I've since spoken to Sarah twice over video call. She does not come across as someone inventing a story. She comes across as someone who is still, quietly trying to explain something that has no explanation. This is her account, as closely as I can reconstruct it. It was a Tuesday in late October. Sarah is certain of that because she was carrying grocery bags from her car to her front door, and she remembers thinking she needed to pick up her daughter's Halloween costume the following weekend. The neighborhood was quiet. Sky was that particular gray that feels like a ceiling pressing down. She took 3 steps up her porch, reached for the door handle, and the next thing she knew, she was standing in a kitchen. Not her kitchen. The kitchen was clean in a way that felt almost staged white cabinets. A wooden fruit bowl with nothing in it. A window over the sink that looked out onto a side yard she didn't recognize. There was afternoon light coming through the window, which confused her because the last she'd checked it had been almost 6 p.m. and already getting dark. She didn't scream. That's what she finds hardest to explain. She stood there in the center of this stranger's kitchen and felt in her words completely calm, as if she belonged there, as if the wrongness of it hadn't registered yet. She set her grocery bags down on the counter. They were still there, in her hands, the plastic handles leaving little red marks on her palms. She set them down, and she looked around the kitchen, and she thought, very clearly, something is wrong. But not frightened wrong. Just wrong. She walked through a doorway into a living room, beige carpet, a brown couch, a television on a low stand. Everything was generic in a way that felt deliberate, like a showroom or a waiting room, like a space that had been designed to look like a home without quite being one. There were no photographs on the walls, no books, no shoes by the door, no mail on the table. The front door was there, and she walked to it and opened it. Outside was her street. That's the part that still makes her voice go quiet when she tells it. Her street. The maples she'd watched grow for a decade, her neighbor Gerald's blue pickup in his driveway. The cracked sidewalk by the fire hydrant she'd been meaning to call the city about. All of it exactly where it should be. She stepped off the porch of the house she was in, and she realized with a start that she was on the opposite side of the street from her own home. She looked back at the house behind her. It was a white two-story, shutters painted gray. A small covered porch. Nothing remarkable. Nothing that would make you look twice. She walked across the street to her own house. Her car was in the driveway. Her grocery bags were gone from her hands. She'd left them in that kitchen. The front door of her house was unlocked, which she didn't remember doing. Her daughter was in the living room watching television, and she said, "Mom, you were gone for a long time." Sarah asked what she meant. Her daughter said, "You went to get groceries, and you were gone for 4 hours." It had been 2 p.m. when she'd come home. It was now 6. In the days that followed, Sarah knocked on the door of the White House across the street. No one answered. Gerald, her neighbor, how long that house had been there. Gerald gave her a strange look and said, "Sarah, that house has been there as long as I have," as she asked if he'd ever seen anyone living there. He thought about it for a moment and then shook his head slowly. He said he'd never thought about it before, but come to think of it, no. He'd never seen anyone going in or out. She called the county assessor's office. The house was on record. It had been on record since 1987. The listed owner was an LLC with a name she's since forgotten. Something generic. Something that never turned up anything useful when she searched for it. The grocery bags were sitting on her porch the next morning. She never went back inside the house. She still lives across the street from it. She says she tries not to look at it directly. She says that when she does, sometimes the afternoon light is coming through the window even when it shouldn't be. She doesn't have an explanation. Neither do I. If that one got under your skin, and it got under mine, please take a second to like this video. It really helps. And if you're not subscribed yet, we do this every week. Every week. Hit that button, and you'll never miss one. Now let's keep going, because it gets stranger from here. Story 2. The Man at the End of the Platform. In 1983, a researcher at the University of Edinburgh published a paper on what he called anachronistic presence, the perception of individuals in environments where they do not temporally belong. It was a fringe study, mostly ignored. He described accounts from multiple unconnected individuals who had encountered people dressed in period-appropriate clothing from earlier decades, people who seemed to interact with their environment and then simply were not there anymore. He theorized these sightings were a form of temporal bleed, moments when the past pressed through into the present like light through a thin curtain. Marcus Webb didn't know about that paper when he saw the man on the train platform. Marcus posted his account on a Reddit thread called r_in_the_matrix about 3 years ago. Got some traction, a few hundred upvotes, and then disappeared into the archive. I found it while putting together this series and spent some time tracking him down. He agreed to let me use his story. He asked that I describe him only as a software developer in his mid-30s who takes the same commuter rail every weekday morning. He said, and I'm quoting him here, "I'm not a person who believes in weird things. I'm telling you this because I don't know what else to do with it." It was a Wednesday. February, gray. The platform wet from the night's rain. Marcus was early, unusually early, he notes, because he'd had a 7 a.m. call and needed to be at his desk. There were maybe 4 other people on the platform when he arrived, all clustered near the middle where the shelter was. He walked to the far end of the platform, which was his habit. He liked the quiet end. He liked getting on the train where it was less crowded and finding a seat before the rush. The man was already standing there. Marcus noticed him the way you notice something that's slightly out of register, like a color that's almost right but not quite. The man was wearing a coat that Marcus's first instinct described as old-fashioned, not costume old-fashioned, just a kind of cut-in fabric that didn't look like anything you'd buy now. Brown, heavy wool, the kind that goes down to the knees. A hat, an actual brimmed hat, not a beanie or a baseball cap, but the kind of hat that people wore in photographs from the 40s and 50s. Marcus assumed he was an older man, a collector type maybe, The kind of person who wears what they like regardless of what era it belongs to. He didn't think much of it. He stood about 10 feet away and took out his phone. After a moment, he looked up. The man had turned and was looking directly at him. What Marcus says next is the part that's difficult to rationalize. It says the man's face was completely blank. Not vacant, not confused, but blank in the way that a face is blank before an expression arrives. As if the man was looking at him and waiting for something, Marcus nodded. The polite thing, "Good morning" nod. The man did not nod back. He continued to look at Marcus for what Marcus describes as a very long moment, and then he turned back to face the tracks. The train arrived 2 minutes later. Marcus got on, found a seat, settled in, put his headphones on. It was halfway through the ride that he realized he hadn't seen the man board the train. He thought about it briefly, decided the man must have gotten on a different car, and forgot about it. 3 weeks later, same platform, same time. Marcus was early again. Same for people in the shelter. He walked to the far end. The man was there again. Same coat, same hat, same positioning, facing the tracks, slightly to the right of center. Marcus stopped walking. He stood there. He looked at this man and he felt, and this is his word, a coldness that wasn't about the temperature. The man did not turn around this time. Marcus took out his phone and took a photograph. He framed it carefully, got the man in clear focus, and took the shot. When the train arrived, he kept his eyes on the man. He did not get on. He watched until the train doors closed and the train pulled away. The man was gone. It's not gone like he stepped aside. It's not gone like he walked away. It's gone the way a thing is gone when it was never quite solid. Marcus looked at the photograph on his phone. There was the platform. There was the wet concrete. There was the far end of the shelter. The man was not in the photograph. Marcus has never seen him since. Still takes the early train on Wednesdays. He still walks to the far end of the platform. Says he doesn't know if he's hoping to see the man again or hoping he doesn't. He says he's started to think about that blank face and the thing it might have been waiting for. He says he thinks maybe it was waiting to be acknowledged. Says he wishes he hadn't nodded. Take a breath. We're 2 stories in, and we've got 4 more ahead of us. If you're enjoying this so far, and I think you are, because you're still here, please like the video and subscribe. It costs nothing, and it means everything to us. All right, next one. Story 3. The Caller. The FCC receives thousands of complaints about ghost calls every year. These are calls that arrive on someone's phone from a number that does not exist, or from their own number, or from the number of someone who has been dead for years. The official explanation involves digital packet switching and SIM spoofing. The official explanation covers most cases. It does not cover Diana Coffer's case. Diane's account was submitted to a podcast called Strange Static, a podcast that specifically investigates anomalous phone call experiences. The host shared it with me after I reached out following the original episode. Diane agreed to let me retell it with one condition, that I not describe where she lives. She still lives there. She still has the same number. She did not change it because, in her words, she's afraid that if she does, whatever tried to reach her might try another way. Diane is a night shift nurse. She works 3 12-hour shifts a week and spends the rest of her time, in her words, being aggressively normal, errands, cooking audiobooks, calls with her sister. She is not a person who frightens easily. She has seen things in hospitals that would hollow most people out, and she carries them with a nurse's particular composure, the kind that is not coldness, but is something built from long practice. The first call came on a Thursday night. She was home. Technically a day off, but running on hospital time. Awake at 2 a.m. watching something forgettable on her laptop. Her phone buzzed. The number was her mother's. Diane's mother died 4 years ago, pancreatic cancer. Quick as these things go, 8 weeks from diagnosis to end, and stared at the screen. The name was right there in her contacts. Mom. With the little heart emoji, she'd put there years ago and never removed. Because removing it felt like something she was unready for, she answered. She doesn't know why. She asks herself that all the time. She answered, there was a sound, not a voice, not at first. A sound like air moving through a space, like a room that is breathing. And then underneath it, something that was almost words. Not words she could make out, not words in any language she could identify. But the rhythm of speech, the cadence of someone talking very quietly, very far away, in a place where the signal could only carry so much. Diane said, "Hello?" She said it twice. She said, "Mom," once, and then felt immediately foolish, and then felt immediately that it was the right thing to have said. The sound continued for approximately 40 seconds, and then the call dropped. She called the number back immediately. It rang 4 times and went to her mother's voicemail, still active after 4. Years because she'd been paying the bill, she realizes now, without fully acknowledging why. And she heard her mother's recorded voice say cheerfully, as if nothing had happened at all, "Hi, you've reached Patricia. Leave me a message." Diane hung up. The second call came 9 days later. Same time, 2 a.m., same number. She answered again before she'd fully decided to. This time it was different. Sound was clearer, still not quite language. But in the sound, underneath it, there was something that felt structured. Something that felt like, "I need you to pay attention." And then right at the edge of audible, Diane heard her name. She is certain about this. She is a careful, methodical person, and she knows what she heard. Her name, 2 syllables, slightly slurred, as if the speaker was very tired, or very far away, or both. "Diane," she said. "Mom, is that you?" The sound shifted. The breathing quality changed. And then, clearly enough that she dropped her phone. A single word, a name, not Diane's name. It's the name of her sister. Her sister, who Diane had been unable to reach for 3 days. Diane called her sister immediately. The phone rang 7 times, and she was composing herself to leave a message when her sister picked up, groggy and confused, having been asleep. She was fine. She was completely fine. But she said she'd been having a recurring dream that week. A dream where she was in a hospital room, and there was someone at the window. And she could never make out their face, and they kept saying her name. The call stopped after that. Diane has not heard from her mother's number again. She doesn't know if whatever was calling got through. She doesn't know if it was finished, or if it's waiting, or if the moment has simply passed. She left her mother's voicemail active. She paid the bill again last month. She says it feels like a door she doesn't want to close. We're halfway through tonight's stories, and I hope you're somewhere comfortable. If a friend of yours needs to hear this, or if you think they don't, but actually they do, share this video with them. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do. We're here every week, and we're not going anywhere. All right, 3 more. Story 4. Exit 44. There is a documented psychological phenomenon called highway hypnosis, a trance-like state that drivers enter on long, monotonous roads where they arrive at a destination with no memory of the last several miles. Researchers estimate it happens to most drivers at some point in their lives. It is considered normal. Joel Castillo drives a stretch of interstate for work 3 times a week. He knows highway hypnosis. He knows what it feels like. He knows the difference between a blank mind drifting across familiar miles and genuine alertness. He has driven over 1,000,000 miles in his career. He does not zone out. He does not miss exits. He knows the difference between all of that and what happened on the night of March 14th. Joel is a long-haul logistics coordinator for a regional trucking company, not a truck driver himself, the person who drives to pick up and deliver company vehicles across a 4-state area, sometimes covering 400 miles in a single day in whatever vehicle needs moving. He has been doing this for 11 years. He is experienced. He is methodical. He keeps a small notebook in the center console where he logs each job: departure time, arrival time, mileage, fuel stops, anomalies. He started keeping the notebook not because the company required it, but because he likes having a record. He likes being able to go back and verify things. He told his story to a truckers forum called Mile Marker Talk, a community of long-distance drivers who share road stories, route tips, and what they call things you don't radio in. The post sat there, largely unnoticed, for 2 years before someone flagged it in a paranormal subreddit and it found a wider audience. I found it through that chain, reached out through the forum's private messaging system, and Joel agreed to a phone call. He spoke for nearly 2 hours. He was careful, specific, occasionally frustrated with himself for not being able to explain it better. He said, "I know how it sounds. I've been driving these roads my whole adult life and I know exactly how it sounds. I just need someone to put it on record because I'm not going to stop thinking about it and I need it to be somewhere outside of my own head." The night in question, Joel was returning from a pickup in a town about 240 miles north of his home, a cargo van that needed to come back to the company depot. Solo drive, no cargo, just him and the van and the road. It was late March, so the nights were still long and cold. He'd left the pickup location around 9 p.m. and was making good time. It was around 11 p.m. when he hit the stretch. He knows the road the way you know a road you've driven 300 times, not consciously, not with active attention, but in the body. He knows where it curves. He knows where the pavement changes texture from the resurfacing job they did 2 years ago. He knows where the tree line opens up and you get a clear view of the sky for about half a mile before the forest closes back in. He knows where exit 44 is. The interstate was quiet. 2 sets of headlights visible far back in his rear view. Nobody ahead. The radio was on low, a late-night talk program, the kind with callers sharing opinions he only half listened to. The van drove smoothly. Everything was ordinary in all the ways a late-night highway in March is ordinary. He passed exit 43. He registered it the way he always does, automatically, almost subconsciously. 43, the green sign, the reflective lettering, the ramp curving away into the dark. He noted it, filed it. Then came what should have been about 1.5 miles of road. Then exit 45. He processed this, actually said out loud in the empty van. Wait, he was not confused in the dreamy way of someone waking up from a zone out. He was alert. He had just seen 43 and now he was passing 45, and he knew. He knew with the certainty of a man who logs his miles in a notebook that this was wrong. He checked the GPS mounted on the dash, showed him on the correct road. No rerouting, no anomaly. The little arrow was moving forward on the blue line like everything was fine. Showed him slightly ahead of where he expected to be for the time elapsed. But only by a margin that seemed like nothing, the kind of margin you could explain with a slightly heavier foot than usual. He checked his trip odometer. From exit 43 he had traveled 4.2 miles. Exits on that stretch run between 1 and 1.5 miles apart. He had traveled more than enough distance to have passed exit 44. He had traveled the distance of 3 exits. He had checked the clock, 11:09 p.m. He tried to remember exit 43, the sign, the ramp, and he could remember it clearly. He tried to remember anything between that sign and exit 45, and there was nothing there. It's not the blankness of sleep, not the soft nothing of a zone out, something more specific than nothing, more like the feeling of a word that has been erased. You can see the impression of it on the page. You can tell something was there. You could not read what it said. He kept driving. He reached his destination, a distribution lot about 28 miles further south, and he signed in with the night attendant. The attendant logged him in at 11:47 p.m., which matched his own mental math for the drive. He asked the attendant, and this is where Joel's methodical nature becomes important. He asked if there had been any road closures or detours reported on the interstate that evening. Anything that might have rerouted traffic, anything that might explain a gap in the exits. The attendant said no. He checked a screen. No incidents, no closures, nothing. On the drive home in his personal car, which he'd left at the depot that morning, Joel went back up the same stretch of road going southbound. He drove slowly in the right lane, hazards off, doing 55 where the limit was 70, the kind of driving that makes other people angry. Exit 44 was there. Rest area. The familiar blue sign. The ramp curving right into the trees. Everything in its place. He pulled off. He sat in the rest stop parking lot with the engine running for 20 minutes. The parking lot had 4 other vehicles in it. A semi with its lights off, driver presumably sleeping. A minivan with the dome light on, somebody reading or looking at their phone. 2 empty cars that could have been there for hours. He got out of his car and he walked to the edge of the parking area and he looked back at the road. He watched cars pass. He counted the gaps between them, stood in the cold, in the March dark, trying to feel if there was something wrong about this place. Something that would explain why he hadn't been able to find it going the other direction 4 hours earlier. He felt nothing. It was a rest stop. It smelled like diesel and cold pine. He drove the northbound stretch again 2 days later, same time, deliberately. Exit 44 appeared exactly where it should. He has driven it dozens of times since. It has always been there. What Joel came back to over and over in our phone call was not the missing exit itself. It was what he called the texture of the gap. He's a precise man, so he worked hard to find the right words for this. He said that highway hypnosis has a specific feeling, a coming back, a resurfacing, a sudden awareness that time has passed and you weren't quite there for it, like surfacing from water. He knows that feeling. What he experienced between exit 43 and exit 45 was not that. It was more like, he said, pausing for a long time before finishing the sentence. It was more like moving around something. Like when you're walking down a hallway and there's an obstacle and you step to the side without fully processing it, and then you're past it, and only afterward does your brain register that you moved. The obstacle is behind you. You didn't look at it directly. You just accommodated it. He said, something was on the road, or in that stretch of road. Something that I passed around or through and couldn't see directly. And I think whatever it was, the road closing around it, the 1.5 miles becoming nothing. Exit 44 just not being there. I think that was the road doing what it needed to do so I wouldn't have to interact with it. I asked him what he thought it was. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I think about the drivers who don't come back. It's the ones who go missing on long stretches of highway and they never find the car. They never find anything. I used to think those were accidents, whether we're sleep or someone crossing the center line. I still think that mostly, but sometimes I think about what I moved around in the dark on March 14th, and I wonder if those drivers looked at it directly. I wonder if they saw what I didn't, he said. I'm glad I don't remember. I think I'm supposed to be glad I don't remember. He still drives the route 3 times a week. He still logs everything in the small notebook. He checks exit 44 every single pass, northbound and southbound, day and night. He says it has never been missing again. He says he hopes it never is. But he keeps checking every time. He keeps checking. Story 5. The Twin. There is a term in folklore studies called a doppelganger, from the German for double walker. In nearly every cultural tradition on Earth, there is a version of the same belief, that encountering a perfect copy of yourself is an omen. That the copy is not a copy at all, but something that has always existed alongside you, unseen, waiting. In Norse mythology it was called the Vardager, in Finnish the Itawinen. The ancient Egyptians had a word for it, the Ka, a spiritual duplicate that walked the world parallel to the body, sometimes preceding it, sometimes remaining behind. Psychologists have a different name for it, autoscopy. The clinical explanation involves temporal lobe disruption, out-of-body experience, neurological misfires that cause the brain to project a visual copy of the self into the external environment. It has been documented in patients with epilepsy, extreme migraines, and certain psychiatric conditions. Reina Torres has none of those conditions. She has been evaluated. She asked for the evaluation herself in the weeks after it happened because she needed to be certain. The results were, in every respect, normal. Neither explanation fully accounts for what happened to her on a Saturday afternoon 14 months ago. Raina's account was shared in a closed Discord server for paranormal experiencers, a server that requires an application to join, maintains strict verification protocols, and has rules about not sharing other members' personal information publicly. A member of that server, who goes by a handle I'm keeping private at their request, flagged the account and, with Raina's permission, made an introduction. I spoke with Raina on 3 separate occasions over the course of 2 months. Each time, the details were consistent. Each time she told it the same way, with the same pauses in the same places, the way a person tells a story that is not a story, but a record of something they are still processing. She said, "If this is happening to other people, I want them to know they're not alone. And if it isn't, if it's only happened to me, I still need someone to know it happened." Raina is 28 years old. She lives alone in a mid-sized apartment in a city she prefers not to name, in a building she has lived in for 3 years. She works remotely in customer support, which she describes as fine, steady work that requires a particular kind of patience that she has. She describes her lifestyle as quiet, and she means this without apology. She has a small social circle. She walks every day. She cooks elaborate meals for herself and feels no awkwardness about it. She is not an anxious person, not prone to fantasy, not someone who has previously had any experience she would describe as paranormal. She makes this point clearly and without defensiveness. She wants you to understand who she is before she tells you what happened, because who she is matters to the telling. It was a Saturday in late September. She had been out for a long walk, her standard route, about 3 miles, along a park path that runs near her building and loops back through a residential neighborhood she likes for its old trees and the way it smells in autumn. She'd been out for about an hour. She had her headphones in for the first half and took them out for the second, preferring the sound of leaves. She came home around 3 in the afternoon, unlocked her door, stepped inside, toed off her shoes in the entryway the way she always does. She walked down the short hallway. Her apartment is small, and the layout is straightforward. The hallway leads directly into an open kitchen and living room space, no doors between them, just a widening of the space and a shift in the flooring from tile to wood. You can see the kitchen from the hallway before you're fully in the room. There was a woman at the kitchen sink. Raina stopped walking. She stopped mid-stride, one foot still raised, and she stood there in the hallway and she looked at the woman. The woman had her back turned. She was doing something at the sink. The water was running. She appeared to be washing something, her arms moving in the slow, methodical way of someone rinsing dishes. She was wearing a gray zip-up hoodie, dark leggings. Her hair was pulled up in a loose bun, the kind held in place with a single elastic that always threatens to fall out. Raina looked down at herself. Gray zip-up hoodie, dark leggings, hair in a loose bun, the elastic she'd put in before her walk still barely holding. She told me later that the first thought she had was not, "Oh God," or "What is this?" The first thought she had in the split second before anything else was, "But I don't have a roommate." And then the second thought followed the first, like a door swinging open onto something cold. "That is me," Raina said very quietly. "Hello?" The woman at the sink turned off the water. Not quickly. Not with the startled motion of someone who has just realized they're not alone. Slowly, the way you turn off a tap when you're finished, with the unhurried movements of someone who has always known you were there. And then she began to turn around. Raina ran. She is clear about this. She does not say she backed up or stepped away or retreated. She ran. She turned in the hallway and went back to the front door in 3 or 4 strides, and she went out into the building corridor, and she shut her own door behind her, and she stood with her back against the wall, breathing. She stood there for 4 minutes. She counted. She has a habit developed in therapy in her early 20s. For an anxiety that has since largely resolved of counting her breaths when something spikes her nervous system. In 4-4, hold 4-4, out for 4, she did this. She stood in the corridor of her building, back against the wall, and she counted her breaths, and she did not hear anything from inside her apartment. No footsteps, no water running, no sound of anything moving. After 4 minutes, she made herself reach out and turn her own doorknob. The apartment was empty. She searched it the way you search a space when you are trying to be rational about something irrational. Every room, every closet, the bathroom, under the bed, behind the shower curtain. She moved slowly, and she kept the lights on in each room as she left it. There was no one there. There was nowhere anyone could have gone. Her apartment is on the 4th floor with no fire escape accessible from her windows, and she had been standing in front of the only door. She went to the kitchen. The sink was dry, not damp, not recently used dry, but fully dry, as if no water had run through it in hours. The window above the sink, a window she almost never closes because the latch sticks and it is difficult to open once it's set, was locked, fully latched, the way she never leaves it. She stood in her kitchen and she looked at the dry sink and the locked window, and she thought about the woman with her back turned, moving her arms in the slow, methodical way of someone rinsing dishes, and she thought about the sound of the water turning off. She called her best friend and stayed on the phone for 2 hours, sitting on her couch with all the lights on. She did not tell her friend exactly what she'd seen. She said she'd thought someone was in her apartment, that it turned out to be nothing, that she just needed to hear a voice. Her friend stayed on the phone, and they talked about other things, and eventually Raina felt the adrenaline ebb out of her, and she felt tired, and she went to bed with the hallway light on. In the weeks that followed, she changed her locks. She bought a doorbell camera for the inside of her entryway. She bought a window sensor that beeps if the window opens. She did not tell her building manager because she didn't know what she would say. She did not go to the police for the same reason. She went to her doctor and asked for a neurological referral. She got an MRI. She spoke to a neurologist who was thorough and kind, and told her that there was no structural abnormality, no indication of any condition that could produce visual hallucinations, no sign of anything wrong. She went home with a clean bill of health and a feeling she describes as, "So then what was it?" She has never seen the figure again. The camera in her entryway has never recorded anything that shouldn't be there. She has come home hundreds of times in the 14 months since, and each time she pauses in the hallway before rounding the corner into the kitchen. Each time, she calls out hello into the empty apartment before she enters her room. She says she doesn't know if this is a reasonable precaution or a kind of ritual. She says maybe those are the same thing. And there is one more thing. She mentioned it almost offhandedly in our third conversation. The way people sometimes save the detail that matters most for when they've decided they trust you enough. When she had been standing in the corridor with her back against the wall, counting her breaths, she had caught, in the fraction of a second before she ran, a glimpse of the figure beginning to turn, not the full face, the profile, the edge of a cheek, the set of a jaw she knows from mirrors. She said the expression was not threatening. It was not angry, not blank, not the frozen mask of something that has been caught. She said, it looked sad, deeply sad. The way a person looks when they are about to say something they've been carrying for a very long time. And she said, and this is the part that she said she hasn't been able to put down. Not in 14 months, she said. I think it had something to tell me. I think whatever was in my kitchen had come there for a reason, and I ran before it could finish turning around, and now I will never know what it was. She said, sometimes I think about going back to the kitchen and calling hello into the empty room, just to see. Just in case whatever it was is still trying. She hasn't done it yet. She says she's still deciding. Story 6. The Boy on the Shore. In 1999, developmental psychologist named Dr. Alicia Fenn published a paper on what she called impossible memory in early childhood. Cases where children under the age of 5 demonstrated detailed knowledge of events, places, people, and deaths that they had no logical access to. She documented 31 cases across 6 countries, all following a similar pattern. The child speaks with certainty about a life they could not have lived, provides verifiable details, and then typically by the age of 7 or 8, forgets everything they once knew with a completeness that the psychologist found as strange as the knowledge itself. The phenomenon has been studied sporadically since, associated most notably with the late Dr. Ian Stevenson of the University of Virginia, who spent 40 years and documented over 3,000 cases of children who appeared to remember previous lives. His methodology was rigorous. His conclusions were careful. He never claimed to know what the cases proved. He only said that he could not explain them. Most researchers who have followed his work say the same thing. The explanations that are offered range from cryptomnesia, information absorbed unconsciously and remembered as if firsthand, to something in the genetic transmission of memory, to something that most researchers, even those who find the data compelling, do not like to name out loud because naming it means standing somewhere they were not trained to stand. Ann Sutter is not a researcher. She's a 53-year-old retired school teacher who spent 3 decades in a 4th-grade classroom in a small coastal town in Maine. She knows how children talk. She knows what it sounds like when a child is pretending, when a child is confused, when a child is repeating something they heard from an adult, and when a child is telling you something they understand to be simply plainly true. She knows the difference. That's what matters. She found me through the email address I keep on this channel. She wrote a very long, very careful letter. She called it a letter, not an email, which I think says something about her explaining that she had never told this story publicly, that she had spent close to 30 years carrying it privately, and that she was ready, at this point in her life, to let it exist somewhere outside of her own memory before it didn't have the chance to anymore. She wrote, "I don't want this to die with me, even if no one believes it. Even if it doesn't mean what I think it means. Someone should know it happened. I believe it. And by the end, I think you will too." It begins with her son, Thomas. Thomas was 3 years old in the summer of 1996. He was a healthy, curious, energetic child, the kind who asks why about everything and follows the answer with another why, who collects interesting rocks and forgets them in his pockets, who could spend an hour watching a beetle navigate a sidewalk crack. Anne describes him with the specific warmth of a mother who paid close attention. That summer, Anne took Thomas to a beach on the Maine coast, a beach she had never been to before. Chosen partly on a colleague's recommendation, and partly because she needed quiet that summer. She doesn't explain why. She just says, "I needed quiet that summer, and this beach was supposed to be quiet." And it was. They arrived around 10 in the morning. The beach was not deserted. There was a couple far down the shore, a dog trotting the waterline, a pair of teenagers with a speaker set low. But it was quiet in the way that mattered, which is to say there was space and the sound of water and room to breathe. Anne spread out a blanket near the upper beach, and Thomas immediately did what 3-year-olds do at the ocean, which is to throw himself at it. He ran for the water's edge and shrieked when the small waves hit his feet, and ran back and then did it again. Anne watched him and let herself be somewhere simple for a while. After about 20 minutes, Thomas stopped. He didn't trip, he didn't fall. He just stopped running, mid-stride at the very edge of the wet sand, and stood very still with his face turned down the beach. Anne had seen him stop like that before. Children sometimes do it. This sudden full-body attention, like a dog that has heard something human ears can't catch. She followed his gaze. Down the beach, maybe 100 yards, there was a boy. He looked to be around 8 or 9, and guessed. He was standing alone near the base of the dunes, the seagrass moving around him in the breeze, facing toward them. Dark hair, a light-colored shirt, white or pale yellow, she couldn't tell at that distance. He was absolutely still. Anne looked around for his parents, the automatic reflex of a woman who had spent 30 years responsible for other people's children. There was no one near him. The couple far down the beach were not looking his way. The teenagers were absorbed in their music. The boy stood alone by the dunes and looked at them. Kana said, very quietly, almost to himself, in the tone of someone recognizing something they expected to find. "I know him." Anne looked at her son. He was still looking down the beach. She said, "You do? Who is he?" Thomas didn't answer right away. He stood there watching the boy, the way you watch something you're trying to figure out, head slightly tilted. Then he said, in the matter-of-fact voice that 3-year-olds use when they are telling you something obvious, "That's me." Anne looked at the boy again. He was too far for her to make out the details of his face. Dark hair, light shirt, standing very still. He could have been any child. She said carefully, "Thomas, that's not you. You're right here." And Thomas said, with a patience that she says was almost gentle, as if he understood that she was having trouble following, "I know. That's me from before." She crouched down beside him. She was a developmental psychologist by training as well as a teacher, and part of her mind was already sorting through frameworks, imaginative play, magical thinking, the way young children sometimes blur the categories of self and other. All of those were possible. All of them were reasonable. But she says she knew, even as she reached for those frameworks, that they didn't fit. She knows what it sounds like when a child is playing pretend. She knows the particular vocal quality of a child who is performing something for an adult's attention. This was not that. Thomas was not looking at her. He was not performing. He was looking down the beach at this boy the way you look at something that belongs to you, something familiar in a way that predates language. She said, "From before what, Thomas?" He said, "From before you were my mom." She didn't say anything. She stayed crouched beside him, and she looked down the beach, and the boy was still there, still standing by the dunes, still facing them. And then she looked away for a second. She thinks she blinked. She thinks she turned to look at Thomas's face, and when she looked back at the dunes, the boy was gone. Not retreating, not walking away. Gone in the way that things are gone when they were never fully solid. She walked to where he'd been because she is the kind of person who checks. It was not a long walk. She stood at the base of the dunes, and she looked up the sandy path that led toward the parking area. She scanned the tree line, the beach in both directions. Nothing moved. There were no footprints in the sand near the dunes beyond her own. She went back to Thomas. He was already back at the waterline, chasing the small waves, shrieking when they caught him. She asked him again that evening at dinner in the little place they found near their rental, asked him about the boy on the beach, what he meant by before. Thomas looked at her with the genuine blankness of a child who cannot remember what you're referencing. He said, "What boy?" Life continued. Anne taught school. Thomas grew. He was a gentle child, and then a gentle teenager, and then a gentle young man, patient, attentive, the kind of person who remembers what you told him last time you talked. He never again said anything that Anne would have described as strange. He never again spoke about it before. He grew up and moved out and started his own life, and by all accounts, in every way Anne could observe, he was simply himself. He had no memory of that afternoon. She asked him about it once, when he was in his 20s, framing it carefully, telling him she wanted to share a memory from when he was little. He listened politely, said he had no recollection of the beach or the boy or anything he'd said. He was curious about why she was telling him, and she said she didn't know exactly, and they moved on to other things. 3 months after the beach, so October of 1996, Thomas just turned for Anne was home on a Saturday. One of those gray October Saturdays that feel like an invitation to go through old boxes. She pulled out several boxes of her mother's belongings that she'd been storing in the back of a closet since her mother's death 2 years prior. Old photographs mostly. Her mother had been a devoted keeper of photographs, the kind who labeled the back of every single one in a small, neat hand. Anne sat on the living room floor and went through them slowly. Near the bottom of the second box, she found a photograph she didn't recognize. It was old, the quality and color saturation of something from the early 1970s, a beach. The beach was quiet and slightly gray, the way Maine beaches are in overcast summers. and the dunes were visible in the background, the seagrass moving the way it always moves. Standing near the base of the dunes was a boy. He looked about 8 or 9. Dark hair, light-colored shirt, white, she could see now, clearly. Was facing the camera. He was alone, and sat very still for a long time. Then she turned the photograph over. In her mother's small, neat hand, Tommy. Pemaquid Beach, 1973. Tommy was her mother's younger brother. He had died in 1974. She had known this her whole life as a family fact, a quiet sadness at the edge of her mother's history. She had never known the details. Her mother did not speak of it in detail. And Anne had understood from a young age that some griefs are not for sharing in full. She had never shown Thomas this photograph. She had never mentioned Tommy to Thomas at all. He was not a story she had told her son. He was not a name that had come up. It was a peripheral family grief, specific and old, and Thomas had been 3 years old that summer. There was no way he could have known. She looked at the photograph for a long time, at the dark hair, the light shirt, the dunes behind him with the seagrass moving. She looked at the beach and she recognized it. It was the same beach. She was certain of it. The same curve of the shoreline, the same particular shape of the dunes, the same path in the background that led up toward the parking area, Pemaquid Beach. The beach a colleague had recommended. The beach she had chosen that summer because she needed quiet. The beach where her 3-year-old son had looked down the shore at a boy standing near the dunes and said, very quietly, almost to himself, "That's me from before." Anne drove back to Pemaquid Beach once, alone, several years after Thomas had grown up and moved away. She went in late autumn when it would be nearly empty. She parked, and she walked down to the water, and she stood there in the cold, and she looked at the dunes. She stayed for about an hour. She didn't do anything in particular. She just stood there and let herself be in the place where it had happened, and she thought about Tommy, who had died at 10 years old in 1974, and about Thomas, who was by then in his late 20s, living a life that had nothing to do with beaches or old photographs or things that could not be explained. She thought about a 3-year-old pointing down the shore and saying, with such calm certainty, "That's me from before." She says she doesn't know what it means. She is a careful thinker, and she resists the pull of clean conclusions. She says she's not sure it needs to mean anything specific. She says she thinks some things happen at the edge of what we can understand and they don't come with explanations attached. They just come. She says she hopes that Tommy, wherever he went, whatever he became, whatever the journey was from a boy on a beach in 1973 to a child, born 2 decades later to a woman he'd never met, she hopes he found something good. She hopes the before was worth leaving. She hopes what came after was worth arriving too. She says that Thomas is 30 now, that he is gentle and patient and sometimes laughs at things that are about to happen a half second before they do, that he loves the ocean, though he's never been drawn to a particular part of it, never expressed any pull toward Maine specifically. She says he has her eyes. She says she loves him more than she has ever been able to find words for, and she has been a person who works with words her entire adult life. She says maybe that's the point of all of it. Whatever circuit is impossible, defying a logic path brought them to each other. Maybe that's the point, that they found each other, they got the time. She says she thinks that's probably enough. I think so too. Chano outro. And that's our 6 stories for tonight. 6 encounters. 6 moments where the rules of the world as we understand it bent just enough to let something through, or to take something away, or to show something that had no business being seen. I want to thank every person who shared their account, every person who trusted us with the strangest thing that ever happened to them. That takes courage. It's a kind that doesn't get talked about much, because it's not courage against a threat, it's courage against the feeling that no one will believe you. We believe you. If you have a story, if something happened to you that you've never been able to explain, that sits in the back of your mind at 2 in the morning, our email is in the description. We read everything. We respond to as much as we can. And if your story is the kind that needs to be on this channel, we'll find a way. You enjoyed tonight's series, please, genuinely it matters, hit the like button. It tells whatever algorithm is running the show out there that people want this content. And subscribe if you haven't. We post every week. We're not going anywhere. Come back next time, because we're not done yet. Not even close.